हेलो फ्रेंड्स, वेलकम बैक टू माय चैनल। आज मैं आपको हाइबरनेट आर्किटेक्चर बताऊंगा। इससे पिछले वीडियो में मैंने आपको हाइबरनेट का बेसिक ओवरव्यू बताया था। तो आर्किटेक्चर में आप यहाँ पर परसिस्टेंस ऑब्जेक्ट और कोर इंटरफेसेस हाइबरनेट के कैसे यूज़ होते हैं वो आप समझेंगे। तो लेट्स स्टार्ट। यू हैव अ जावा एप्लीकेशन, ओके, and in your Java application there is requirement like we have to store our POJO class, we have to store the persistence object in the database server, like we have to create the table using Hibernate framework. Okay, so we don't have to manually create the table. Hibernate framework will does that for us. So what is persistence object? So when in Java application you have to create the persistence object. So for that there is POJO class. Suppose you want to store employee entity. Okay, this EMP object is the object of employee class, and employee can be named as entity also. POJO and entity are same, there is no difference. Only when we will annotate with @entity, with @entity annotation, we will get the entity. So plain old Java object, when we will create the instance of this POJO class, we will say that it is under transient state. Okay, and in this employee class you will have to create the getter setter method for the fields. And let's suppose there is a field as employee ID, EMP ID, and for that field if you will call the setter method emp dot set emp id, because emp id is the field, so you are setting as one as emp id. Let's for example, so when we will call the set method from this employee class, from this employee object, yes, now we can say that this is the transient state. Now this, after we have called the set method, then when we will call the save method or save or update method from the session object, then we can say that it is under persistence state. So persistence object means when we will call the save method or persist method from session object, means persistence means it is related with the session object. So what are these configuration, session factory, session, transaction, query? This stack means these are the core components or core interfaces of Hibernate framework. Okay, so on the top of it there are configuration. So from configuration object we can create the configurations of Hibernate, like Hibernate configuration XML is there. Earlier we have been using the XML file like Hibernate cfg.xml and Hibernate mapping file hbm.xml. So now we are using annotation based Hibernate framework. So from configuration object we can get the session factory object. And what is session factory? It is interface which has multiple sessions. Okay, so from session object we can create the object for transaction interface and query interface also. So transaction and query interface object we can get from session object, and from session factory object we can get the object for session. So what is session interface? It is basically related with the, like we are communicating with the database. So from session object we will call the save or persist method or save or update method or save method. So from session object we are persisting our transient object. Okay, and these are the core interfaces. So these are the important components, friends. From these components only we will be able to communicate with the database server using JDBC API. So JDBC means Java Database Connectivity. Using JDBC configuration, like we use the configuration as, let's suppose MySQL database is there and JDBC colon MySQL colon double forward slash colon localhost or IP address, any database IP address colon port. For localhost there is 3306 port, then slash database name. So this is the JDBC URL. Okay, so JDBC has a JDBC driver. Like if we are using MySQL, then JDBC will call the MySQL driver and we can communicate with the database. So there is database username and password also. After that, JDBC will communicate with the database directly. So first state is transient state, when we will create the object for POJO class. Then it will be stored in the persistence state. Okay, so thank you friends for watching my channel. Please comment on the chat.